On today's show, the Hawks made a big-time trade during the first round of the NBA draft. Plus, they add a local product to the mix for the long term. We'll get into all of what transpired and more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 2008 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you deep into the night here. In fact, it's now Thursday morning after the 2025 NBA draft. The first round is in the books, and I want to encourage you at the top of the show, as I always do, to make Locked On Hawks your first listen each and every day. Check us out and subscribe to the show anywhere you find your podcasts. We are on Apple, Spotify, Overcast. We're also on YouTube, so please like this video as you're watching it. And, of course, be sure to tell your friends and your colleagues about this show. I was in the building at State Farm Arena this evening talking to all kinds of people about what was going on with the Hawks, then hearing from Auntie Saleh after the fact, hearing from Asa Newell after the fact. It was a busy night for the Hawks and for me, as we'll get into in a lot of detail on today's show, a very productive and positive night for the Hawks. The draft is a favorite of mine. It's a long day, but it's a fantastic day. And by the way, it's not over yet. The second round is coming up on Thursday evening, but in the meantime, the headliner for me is that it was a very, very positive night for the Hawks, a good night for the organization moving forward, a process-driven, value-driven night, and they also add a very intriguing player for the future. So the big transaction was actually a trade. So number one, if you missed anything leading up to the draft, I'd encourage you to listen back to all of that, plus the emergency podcast for the Kristaps Porzingis trade that the Hawks made on earlier this week. Like, that was a very busy kind of big picture move, overarching decision that impacts so many things for the Hawks. And then it leads right into the draft. So here we are. But Atlanta went from having 2 picks in the first round to having 1 at number 13 overall. And then, of course, they chose to trade down in the draft on Wednesday, a scenario that I explored on the show on Tuesday night, but also was not necessarily expecting to happen. It was one of those, like, this is very possible if things break a certain way. And I thought it was actually interesting. Ansi, post-draft, post-first round, kind of acknowledged, like, the scenario that I kind of laid out. Like, if you get to a spot in the first round, you have what he called a, quote, bucket of players that are kind of in the same range. It does behoove you, if you get the right offer, to trade down because you want to just kind of maximize your available assets. And that happened in this class. So the trade is number 13, which was the Hawks' remaining lottery pick after the Porzingis trade, for number 23 in this draft from the Pelicans, and an unprotected 2026 first-round pick. Now, first of all, picks that are not protected at all have big potential value, particularly when they come from teams that are not clearly contenders, as the Pelicans are not. And then that pick for next year, again, 1 year from now, is the most favorable of New Orleans and Milwaukee. So basically, New Orleans already has a swap with the Bucks, which means they can now offer the best of those 2 picks to anyone in a trade. And that happened here with the Hawks. So the Hawks basically get 2 chances at a lofty draft position from 2 franchises that have some uncertainty, to be kind, right now. I would say overall, this is a legitimately fantastic deal for the Hawks. If you're a regular listener, you will probably know that I don't get hyperbolic or effusive in my praise all that often. I'm pretty measured. I like to look at things from all the angles, and we'll do that as we always do on the podcast. But I think it's just a flat-out excellent deal, and I don't mean that lightly when I say it. I really do believe it's like an A-plus kind of grade of a transaction for me. And just to get out in front of this a little bit, it has very little to do with Derek Queen, who was the pick at 13 to New Orleans, who they wanted to go up and get. I like Derek Queen. He's a lottery pick for me in this class. Not a shot at him at all. Also, Carter Bryant went 14. He was the guy that I would have taken happily at 13 as the Hawks. He was still available, obviously. It was much, much, much more about the value of the trade and that future pick. So a little bit of context of what I'm saying here to kind of illustrate what the Hawks pulled off and what I would call like a home run kind of transaction. I shared some of this on social media tonight in real time, but I would say it's very, very rare to get basically 100% approval on anything with a wide group of people who are smart, but also have varying opinions on different things across the league. Like people from front offices and from the media, from agencies, all over the place. I talked to a lot of people tonight during the draft, and a big sample. Again, people that are smart that I believe are like plugged into the league, and a lot of them reached out to me unprompted after the trade happened, but some of them also proactively went out and touched base with. And I'm not kidding when I say this. Everyone that I talked to, dozens of people, everyone liked this deal for the Hawks. If not liked, most of them loved it, to be honest. And then a smattering more like of people on social media that I follow and interact with that are writers and people that chronicle this stuff, like John Hollinger was talking about how the Hawks are smart now, basically. Sam Vecini, good friend of the podcast from The Athletic, basically was questioning whether New Orleans needed to be taken over by the league. That kind of thing. Very obviously, the Hawks won this deal. And look, no deal is without any risk at all. Maybe in a few years we look up and Derek Queen is an all-star, and then people kind of equate this with trading away Derek Queen. Even if, by the way, from what I heard, the Hawks were not going to take Derek Queen if they made the pick at 13. But regardless, it could be something could be said for Carter Bryant. Like, you know how this works. If somebody below that spot becomes a star, the Hawks will get some flack for not taking that player. But maybe the Hawks get nothing from Newell, for instance. As we'll talk about later on, Asa Newell was the pick for the Hawks at 23 years old. 23 in the draft from Georgia, and maybe he misses, and the pick next year doesn't work out. Whatever you want to say, all of that is possible. But from a process and a value standpoint, it's pretty much gold for the Hawks. They moved down 10 spots in the first round, which is not nothing by any means, but it wasn't going from like 2 to 12. Going from 13 to 23 is a drop, but it's not a massive difference. And that was the kind of consensus in this class. I thought that same thing, etc. It does matter, not the end of the world, though. But the price for that, again, was an unprotected first-round pick. That's the better of Milwaukee and New Orleans. So that's upside already with just an unprotected pick. And you only need one of those two teams to have a bad season. One of them. To be in the lottery, and then anything can happen. And look, I talked to some people around the league about this. Two people that I would say are front office analytics types that work in front offices. And they basically, I thought they might have a projection ready for that pick. Most of the time, like, they'll have a working relationship with like assets around the league that are short-term assets. For instance, one of them told me that pick that's coming now to the Hawks from New Orleans has a current expected value of about number 7 overall in the class. When you factor in the downside for both New Orleans and Milwaukee, and the fact that it was, again, the better, more favorable of those picks. That's very high. It's a mid-lottery pick. The other one said a top 10 grade was the quote on that pick. So that's two people, whatever, but it's obviously has upside. And even if it doesn't break perfectly for the Hawks, I would personally project right now that at least one of Milwaukee and New Orleans is in the lottery next year. Because right now, New Orleans will be projected at the moment to be in the lottery. They won 21 games last year, and yeah, they had better talent than that for sure. There were a lot of injuries, but they're not some like loaded roster right now. Milwaukee made the playoffs, of course, but Giannis is there. That's part of this. But they could trade Giannis still at some point. Dame Lillard is out for the season, or at least a lot of the season. That's the roster that's kind of flawed. So, look, maybe they'll put it together, but the chances that one of those teams kind of have a bad year is pretty high. And even if that pick becomes like number 16 overall in the draft, it's still a good trade. Is it as good as if it was 5? No, but it's still a good trade. One more different kind of viewpoint here on this transaction, and I promise I'll move on to the rest of this with Asa Newell. People that I talked to today, most people that I talked to would have traded the pick at 13 for the Hawks today straight up for that future-facing pick from New Orleans next year. Like, the consensus was that I talked to thought the pick at 13 this year was less valuable than the pick they traded for, just the pick. And then they also got 23 back from New Orleans in this trade. So again, I think this is like a plus kind of grade of a transaction. There is uncertainty, but as we'll talk about later on in the show, Asa Soleil was positive about this from the podium after the draft tonight. And I wanted to leave with that because for me, yes, Asa Newell is an interesting prospect, a guy that matters to the Hawks, a pick that I liked totally fine. But the big thing was the process and the move they pulled off to restock the cover from next year. Because now, looking ahead, as we'll talk about a lot more in the coming weeks and months, The Hawks have 2 picks in the first round next year to restock the cupboard, be young, add more talent. They're still bringing Asa Newell, who they thought clearly was better than the 23rd pick in this class, et cetera, et cetera. We'll get into Asa Newell and much more on the podcast when it comes to what I thought about that choice, his overall skill set, and more in just one moment. Today's show is brought to you by WayFair. There's nothing quite like stepping into your own personal space outdoors and feeling like they actually escaped into a personal oasis of sorts. If you want to update your patio or your backyard this season, WayFair has made it so easy to turn that space into something that feels exactly like yours. Comfortable, stylish, and ready for the summer. WayFair has everything you need to level up your outdoor space in any way you want to. That includes conversation sets and outdoor bars, fire pits, hot tubs, gazebos, and everything you need to set the vibe the way that you want it exactly. It's like giving your backyard a resort feel without the resort price tag. If you're working within a budget like I always am, filter out and find exactly what you need at WayFair. It's also the case, by the way, if you don't have a massive space to work with, if you're in an apartment or courtyards, all those things, it's all available for you at WayFair. And delivery with WayFair is also fast, free, and totally hassle-free as well. Even for larger items, that's been huge for me in the past when ordering at WayFair as well. And whether it's an event where you're hosting your friends, just inviting in a smaller group, or by yourself, for instance, it now generally feels like a personal and private retreat with WayFair. Don't wait. Make your outdoor space your dream oasis today with WayFair and enjoy it all summer long. Head to wayfair.com right now. Shop a huge outdoor selection with WayFair. That's WayFair, WayFair, wayfair.com. WayFair, every style, every home. All right, and before I dive into the Asa Newell experience as a player, I will just say, broadly speaking, I thought the pick was totally fine and reasonable at 23. Is that sexy to say? No. But it's the way I feel. If it had been a grade pick, in my opinion, I would tell you I did a lot of work on this class. If you listen to the podcast in the last couple of months, you will know that. If I hated it, I would tell you. If I loved it, I would tell you. I am neither of those things. I think it's totally fine. It's reasonable. He's a talented guy. He's a first-round talent in this class, for example. But unlike the trade that I thought was an unequivocal, home run, awesome move, the pick is right where I thought it could be. I kind of had Asa Newell exactly in this range, somewhere in the high to mid 20s. Totally right there. I'm totally fine with the choice. There were a couple guys that I had rated higher than Newell, but it's only a half tier up. Nothing crazy. Nothing no one that was on the board at 23 infuriated me that they were not the pick, for example. Again, a couple guys that I had higher, nothing crazy. Newell's totally fine. One more thing on the Newell, the player breakdown. There was a very strange, I would call it bizarre, report from NBADraft.net earlier in the day on Wednesday about how the Hawks reportedly, quote-unquote, promised Asa Newell at 13. That was ridiculous immediately, and I called to check on it just to make sure. I was told immediately that's not true. Knowing Ansi Saleh a little bit now, I thought there was just no way they were going to be promising anyone at 13, much as someone who was not a consensus lottery pick. Newell was 19th on the consensus board, so a good player, good prospect, all those things, but that's not a guy you promise at 13. That's not something that I think he would do, generally speaking. I made fun of that at the time. And by the way, it's not just about Newell. It's a practice that most smart teams just don't do because, look, what if someone falls? What if the guy that you have fourth falls? Do you now pass on that guy because you promised Asa Newell? So all those things, it was silly. I did, though, start to hear over the last week or so some guys, a little bit of buzz, Asian communities, all those things, about Newell being a guy the Hawks were at least interested in. He came to town. Obviously, he's not far away with having played at Georgia, but the Hawks liked him from what I heard. But as I'll get into one more time later, Ansi did say that they had a, quote, bucket of players that they were kind of considering at 13. So it wasn't just Newell they were centered on, obviously. They felt good enough to have a process that I like, which is basically, hey, let's be practical. If all of these guys are kind of the same for us, let's move down and get one of them later on. And that happened in this class. I think that Newell was at least somewhat in consideration at 13. From what I understand, my intel is that they probably were not going to take him at 13 if they stuck there. There was a guy or two, I think they probably had a little bit higher than Newell, but they clearly had him rated as a late lottery, mid-first round pick above this slot. They're happy with it. obviously. So it speaks to the process overall that he was at least in play for them at 13, and they're still able to go down 10 spots, get a massive overpay, in my opinion, to get down 10 spots, and then still get a guy that they really liked. So again, process-wise, check the box. Great stuff. To the actual player now. If you don't know, Newell played at Georgia, one-and-done player, 6'9" in bare feet. So like traditionally the way that was measured for a long time, like 6'10" and a half with shoes, something like that. One-and-done guy at Georgia, an Atlanta native, by the way, who played at Montverde Academy in Montverde, Florida, as a senior, 2 years in high school, alongside, by the way, Cooper Flagg and the guy he was traded for, Derek Queen. They all played together on a crazy good high school team. So Asa talked briefly to the media via Zoom. Of course, he's in New York, and I was in Atlanta. He mentioned growing up as a Hawks fan, being from the area, having a Kyle Korver jersey, which was funny, and Asa Newell made fun of that later as well. Kyle being in the front office is kind of a bit of synergy now on this, but obviously he's excited to be here. Confident kid, great intel from what I've heard. Like people really like Asa Newell, the person, and Asa said the same thing, so that's a good thing, of course. He is kind of a tweener positionally. And not in a bad way necessarily, but kind of a split on him from scouts to some degree. Like people had him as high as the lottery. People had him as low as late 20s, maybe early 30s even. Part of that is the positional uncertainty. For me, his biggest appeal, biggest positive thing is his defense. I really like his defense quite a bit. He's a really good athlete with those kind of rangy tools. He can be disruptive, I would say, in how hard he plays, which I appreciate. I like the motor quite a bit. He can switch effectively defensively, play multiple schemes. He can show all those things. Like he's very versatile and effective defensively. One thing that I would say right now on defense is that he's not a great rebounder right now defensively. That could be better in the future. Also, if he's playing the 4, he's fine as a rebounder. At the 5, it'd be a weakness for sure, but worth noting. On offense, definitely more of a mixed bag. Not a disaster, but there's stuff to work with for sure. Again, his motor runs hot, sets screens, flies around, good rebounder on the offensive glass, kind of crashing there. He finished very well at Georgia, shot 70+% from the floor around the rim, I should say. That's good. A good vertical athlete. Again, that definitely helps things. The shot from the perimeter is an open question. He's not a total non-shooter. 30% from 3 at Georgia, not a huge volume, but he was taking them sometimes. There's some shooting projection, and it would be very, very helpful if he shot it from 3. Now, there are plenty of examples of guys who are similar to him who have gone both ways, like guys who developed as shooters, like your Obi Toppins, even John Collins back in the day for the Hawks, that weren't shooters until they got a little bit either older in college or older in the pros, became shooters. Then you have guys who never kind of got there, and it's fine. He can function without that, but it would be very helpful for his offense if he can kind of figure out that jump shot. His feel on offense is not that great. Honestly, did kind of praise his smarts, generally speaking, which I thought was encouraging. But again, the energy, the burst, the athleticism should be helping to offset some of that stuff. He had awesome numbers and transition at Georgia. That should be a weapon of his. He was able to get out and run. The Hawks like to do that for the most part. That'll be good to see. He's gotten some Nick Claxton comparisons, which is kind of maybe a little bit lazy because he's also from Georgia like Claxton was, but also they play fairly similarly, similar size, all those things. Last thing on Newell for now, he rated very well in ESPN's Kevin Pelton has a stats only projection model basically, and it's pretty renowned for being good. He was 8th in the entire class in the stats only portion, which is really encouraging. Now, some of that's he is kind of a tweener. Is that more of a downgrade? Yes, but it's not everything, but it's a good data point that the numbers do like Asa Newell. So again, overall, I do like Newell, particularly on defense. He unlocks a lot. I think he fits pretty well in Atlanta. He doesn't have to play a lot right now, but he could probably play with Okongwu, play with Jalen, play with Porzingis, etc. Again, for me, if you're a new listener, what I always say is you're not drafting for their rookie season. You're drafting for 2 or 3 years down the line in the future. Rookies are not generally great. I don't know how much he's going to play. It will depend on how much everybody else is brought in, how much Porzingis is healthy, all those things. But Newell is a perfectly worthy investment at 23 overall. He's a talented player. I think maybe long-term he might be more of a third big than a starter. But at 23 overall, if you get a third big, you've done well. Like it was funny. This is a good example. And also, I don't mean to pick on this person, but unnamed person basically was saying, oh, great, another John Collins, like with that tone. And I was like, well, number one, John Collins is pretty good. But if you end up with John Collins or even like 80% of John Collins at 23 in the draft, you've done extremely well. So keep that in mind too. Like they're not the same players, but like for instance, if Collins made a shooting improvement, they're similar sized, like again, kind of tweeners. That can be limiting to some degree. I'm not saying it's not, but given his burst athletically, his character stuff that Ansi was raving about, that I've heard great things about as well, the pick's totally fine. I like Newell. I think he's a real prospect and a lot to like about him, even if there is certainly some uncertainty, as there would be for the vast majority of prospects drafted in the 20s of the draft. All right, more to come in a second when it comes to what Ansi said from the podium, as well as some nuts and bolts from the Porzingis trade and what's been announced and what can't be announced, all that stuff. It's coming up in just one moment. This show is brought to you by SKIMS. When I found out that SKIMS was making underwear for men, I was intrigued by that. I've heard a lot about the quality from my friends and family. I had to give it a try for myself. Let me tell you, it lives up to the hype and more. People around my life and others have issues with their underwear sometimes, whether it comes to fit or comfort or just finding the right style for what they want. But SKIMS changes all of that. Their men's line offers something for everyone, from boxer briefs, classic briefs, all designed with the perfect balance of comfort and style in mind. For example, their stretch 5-inch boxer briefs have rave reviews. They're perfect for the active lifestyle. They move with you and never lose their shape, and they stay in place all day long. Whether you're working out or just running errands, they're the most comfortable and reliable underwear available anywhere. Plus, the lightweight material feels amazing in all situations across the board. Shop SKIMS Men's right now at skims.com/LockedOnNBA and also in SKIMS stores. Also, let them know that we sent you to them. After you place your order, select podcast in the survey and select our show, Locked on Hawks, in the menu that drops down after that. One more time, the place to go is skims.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, and I alluded already to some things that Ansi Saleh said from the podium on Wednesday evening into Thursday. One note before I get to that is that there was some consternation, and it's kind of hard to understand all the machinations of why the NBA does the way they do. It's hard to explain some of this stuff because the draft is before the league year begins. There's always been weirdness with like trades and guys wearing different hats and explain. I get all that. I don't love it either. But one thing that's important to keep in mind as to like what hasn't been said so far is that the Hawks have not announced the Porzingis trade. Again, one more time, I did an emergency podcast on Tuesday about the deal. That's still available to listen to right now. But it cannot be officially completed and announced until the moratorium is over in about a week and a half, 2 weeks in July. So the reason why, I guess there's multiple reasons why, but one of them, for example, is that the Nets cannot take Terrence Mann's contract in until the new league year begins. Because right now, we're still in the old league year. They don't have cap space. They will in about a week and a half. So that's one reason why it can't happen. So that means that at the moment, the Hawks cannot say anything publicly about the Porzingis trade. You know, Trae Young tweeted about it. Trae is a player. That's different. If you're in the front office, you cannot acknowledge the deal on the record. It's happening. Don't worry. But barring a physical issue or whatever, but they can't say anything about it. So it would have been great to be able to ask Ansi about the Porzingis trade, because so far he can't speak on it. But that could not happen tonight. That's why it has not happened so far. PSA on all of that stuff. Also, if you watch the TV broadcast of the draft tonight, you would have seen that, quote unquote, the Hawks made the 22nd pick. That was the deal that was in. That was the pick that was in the Porzingis deal. That pick was made, quote unquote, by the Hawks, but it was made on behalf of the Nets as part of that trade. And then the opposite happened later on when the Hawks were announcing. Well, when Silver was announcing the 23rd pick, it was the Pelicans making the pick, even though we all knew it was the Hawks, because that was part of the trade with the Pelicans involving the rights to Queen and the rights to Asa Newell. So it's one of those weird things. I don't like it either, but keep in mind, like what happened here, they go to 23, they make a pick. 22 was not the pick anymore. And in the meantime, we do not have an on-the-record acknowledgement or an announcement or any quotes from Ansi about the addition of Kristaps Porzingis. Last thing, speaking of Ansi, he talked extensively about Asa Newell post-draft today. That was the one thing he was allowed to talk about was the draft. So that's what we focused on post-draft. He said, again, the Hawks felt good about the bucket of players. Newell was one of those. He did confirm that they were definitely considering him at 13. Again, from what I can glean and report, they were probably not going to take him at 13, but they certainly considered it. He noted that the deal made sense for them and just where the team is at, basically saying that it helped them in the future. That's logical and understated, but certainly the case. Ansi also referred to Newell as, quote, a ridiculous athlete, quote, also a great human being. He said he plays, quote, hard as hell, and he is an unbelievable competitor. Those were all direct quotes from Ansi about Newell. He also talked about his intelligence on and off the floor. He noted his propensity for doing things that, quote, impact winning, end quote. He got a question about maybe adding a second-round pick on Thursday. Predictably, in Ansi fashion, he said they have, quote, optionality, but they also want to be flexible. Now, that's a very standard answer. That's what anybody would say. What I would say is, to wrap this up and look ahead to tomorrow, I think from what I have heard, they will be active. They'll be on the phones. Currently, as a reminder, the Hawks do not have a pick in the second round. So right now, they could just be done with the draft. They could be. But they're not going to just sign off. They're going to take calls. There are ways they can offer stuff to get back into the draft on Thursday, whether it be future picks, whether it be money, whether it be like Don Barlow or Kobe Buffkin or whatever. There are stuff you can offer to get more picks and more firepower. And for me, there are guys that I have in my top 35 or so that are still on the board. For instance, Rasheer Fleming, I would have thought about today. In fact, I had Fleming right in the even a little bit higher at times than I did with Newell. Noah Penda is a real top 30 guy for me. Adu Thiero, Maxime Reynaud, Tyrese Proctor, Ryan Kalkbrenner, and Jameer Watkins are all in my top 35. Those guys are all available still. So we'll see. I would say it's certainly on the board. There are also some financial reasons that the Hawks might want to add a second-round pick so they can maybe sign a guy to a cheaper contract and make some more room. They have all of the discussions that I had earlier this week about adding with the trade exception or adding with the mid-level or re-signing Karis LeVert. They have more work to do with the roster, for sure, even with Newell being part of it now. And we'll get into all of this later on, I'm sure, when it comes to Summer League and projecting moving forward. Newell, at the moment, is probably going to be like in a battle for playing time or role with Moget. Like, they're not exactly the same kind of player, but they both are kind of hybrid bigs, combo 4-5s, defense first, probably prospects right now. So, like, that's a head-to-head that you'll probably see at some point, battling in camp, etc. But that's kind of where we are with Newell right now. Again, rookie, 23rd pick, especially a one-and-done guy. It might take him a while. He might play in College Park some. We just don't know. But again, like the pick, encouraged by that, love the trade, like the pick fine, and that is the end of where we'll leave it on today's podcast. So there is a chance that nothing happens on Thursday for the Hawks. That is definitely possible. I will be doing a show at some point, no matter what, whether it comes to Thursday or Friday. Usually the plan is, I don't think it's been officially announced, usually the plan would be for them to get Asa Newell into town tomorrow and have him be able to speak to the media by Friday. He did do a little bit of a Zoom interview today, but more of a true intro press conference. We'll see. But tomorrow, well, I guess today, as I'm recording this podcast now on Thursday, is a busy day with the second round of the draft. I'll be dialed into that, of course. And then there's other stuff that can happen too, like non-draft trades can happen. Like we're certainly now in the zone where things can happen any day, any hour for the Hawks. For about probably the next like 3 weeks, you're in that like high alert zone. That's where we are. So stay tuned. I will have a show at the very latest on Friday, but maybe even tomorrow on Thursday as you listen to this podcast. But please subscribe. That's my full thoughts, at least for now, on the draft. I'll have, again, wall-to-wall coverage of Summer League, of free agency, all that stuff coming up in the coming days. Please subscribe to Locked On Hawks anywhere you find your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, etc. Follow the show on Twitter/X at Locked On Hawks. Follow me there at BT Rowland. I'm also on Blue Sky at BT Rowland. My non-podcast work about the Hawks is at patreon.com/BT Rowland. All right, everybody. I appreciate you listening. A really nice night for the Hawks, honestly, and sets the tone for the future in a big way. More to come later this week, and we'll see you all next time.